He was just an old man in the corner of a dusty workshop, carefully cleaning his rifle as if it still had a mission to complete. But when the Delta Force soldiers leaned closer, their eyes froze on the engraving. And suddenly, silence filled the room. Before I take you deeper into this unbelievable story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The small town of Ashland, Virginia, was quiet that evening. A few kids played baseball near the park. The air smelled of pine, and the sun dipped behind the trees. In a dusty workshop at the edge of town, an old veteran named Walter Briggs sat alone, his hands steady despite his age. Walter wasn't just any veteran. Rumors whispered that he'd been in Vietnam. Others said Iraq, and some swore they'd seen him during Black Hawk Down in Somalia. Nobody knew the full truth. That night, while Delta Force operators were returning from a training session nearby, they stopped at Walter's shop. He was always polite, always quiet, but this time, something caught their eyes. Walter's rifle. It wasn't just any rifle, it was an M14. Perfectly polished, still gleaming like the day it left the factory. Walter's hands moved like a craftsman, each motion deliberate, each stroke of the cloth almost ceremonial. One soldier joked, "Sir, that rifle looks ready for war. Haven't seen an M14 that clean in years." Walter didn't laugh. He looked up, his blue eyes cold but calm. Some weapons don't retire. Some weapons carry the weight of names. Then he turned the rifle slightly, and the soldiers froze. On the side of the stock, deeply carved into the wood, was an engraving for the brothers who never came home. Khe Sanh, 1968. The air shifted. Even the joking soldier went silent. Sergeant Cole, the youngest of the operators, finally broke the silence. Khe Sanh, "Sir, that's Vietnam, right?" Walter's cloth paused mid-stroke on the rifle's stock. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed the rifle gently on the table, as if it were alive, as if it had earned the right to rest. "Vietnam," Walter finally said. His voice was gravelly, but there was something in it that made every man lean closer. Not just Vietnam. Khe Sanh was hell itself. 40 days of mortar fire, 40 days of digging graves with your bare hands. The soldiers exchanged glances. They knew the name Khe Sanh, a siege that became one of the bloodiest and most haunting battles of the war. But hearing it from someone who had been there, that was different. Chief Warrant Officer Ramirez, the oldest of the Delta team, stepped forward. He had respect written all over his posture. "Sir, did you fight there?" Walter looked at him, and for a moment, his eyes softened, like a man standing in two timelines at once. "I didn't just fight there. I carried brothers out of that place. Some breathing, most not. That engraving," he tapped the words on the rifle stock with his rough fingers, "is the only headstone they'll ever have. I carved it because I promised I wouldn't forget them. Even if the world did." The room was silent. The only sound was the faint buzz of the light bulb above Dot. Then Walter leaned back, as if deciding whether or not to tell them more. His hand rested on the rifle again. "This rifle isn't just wood and steel, boys. It's memory, it's blood, and every mark on it tells a story no one ever wanted to hear." Sergeant Cole swallowed hard. "What kind of stories?" Walter's eyes grew distant, unfocused, staring at something only he could see. "The kind you don't sleep after telling," he whispered, and then he began. Walter leaned forward, elbows on the table, his rough fingers tracing the rifle's barrel as if it were a lifeline. "It was January 1968. He began. "They called it a forward defensive position at Khe Sanh. We called it a death trap." The Delta operators glanced at each other. They'd read about the siege of Khe Sanh, but they never heard it told like this. "We were outnumbered, outgunned, and forgotten. Command said reinforcements were coming. Reinforcements never came. Mortar rained every night, so close the ground shook like the devil himself was digging up the earth." Walter's eyes drifted away, as if watching ghosts move in the corners of the workshop. "One night, a fresh kid named Miller, couldn't have been older than 19, sat right next to me. He was writing a letter to his mother, told me he was going to get out of the Corps, go back home, and build cars with his old man. 2 minutes later, a shell landed 20 feet away." Walter's hand trembled slightly. The Delta men saw it, and that shook them more than any battlefield they'd been in. When the smoke cleared, Miller wasn't writing anymore. He wasn't anything anymore. Just a pair of dog tags and a bloodstain in the mud. "And you know what command told us?" Walter's voice hardened now. "Hold the line." He looked up at the Delta Force soldiers, his eyes sharp like a blade. "You boys think you know sacrifice. Sacrifice is digging a grave with your helmet because you don't have time for a shovel. Sacrifice is carving a name into a rifle stock because the government won't carve it on a wall for another 20 years. That's what this engraving means. Every letter is a brother." The operators stood frozen. These were warriors who had seen Fallujah, Kandahar, and Mosul. Yet in that workshop, they felt like children listening to the raw voice of history. Chief Ramirez finally broke the silence. "Sir, how many names did you carve?" Walter's eyes watered, but his voice didn't crack. "Too many, and not enough." Walter leaned back, his hands gripping the rifle tighter. "After Khe Sanh, I thought the war had taken everything from me, but it wasn't over, not even close." The Delta Force men leaned in, sensing the weight in his words. There was a small village, deep in the borderlands of Laos. We were tasked with reconnaissance officially, but unofficially, we were to locate and eliminate enemy officers planning attacks on American bases. Nobody knew we were there. Nobody would know if we didn't come back. He paused, eyes haunted. We walked through jungles thick as nightmares. We weren't supposed to leave a trace, but sometimes traces find you anyway. I watched friends die in ways that the history books would never record. I carried names that were never mentioned in any report. Sergeant Cole swallowed hard. Sir, how did you survive? Walter's voice cracked just a fraction. You survived by holding the rifle like it's your last hope. You survived by carving names so you don't forget. And sometimes, you survive by becoming someone you don't even recognize in the mirror. He pointed to the engraving again. Every name on this stock is a story the world erased. Every bullet I cleaned here reminds me of promises I made to men who will never hold a rifle again. And that is why Delta Force boys, this rifle matters more than you can imagine. The room was deathly silent. Even breathing seemed like a betrayal. The Delta men weren't just listening, they were witnessing history through the eyes of a man who had lived it, who had carried ghosts home, some nights. Walter continued quietly, I still hear the mortar fire. I still see the faces of those boys. That mission, it haunts me more than any government report, more than any medal. It is the one thing I'll never talk about in public. Yet it's here, in this rifle, for anyone brave enough to see it. Chief Ramirez, usually unshakable, nodded slowly. Sir, we understand. More than you know. Walter allowed himself a small sad smile. Then you understand why an old man cleans a rifle at midnight and why he carves names into wood. It's not a hobby, it's memory, it's survival, and it's respect. Walter's hands rested lightly on the rifle. The engraving reflected the dim light. Out of all those I carried, only one made it home. His name was Tommy Harlan. We were at Khe Sanh, trapped under mortar fire. Everyone else, gone. Sergeant Cole's jaw tightened. He had never seen his own men go through so much, yet here he was, feeling it through words alone. Tommy was terrified, but he never quit. When I thought I couldn't move a step, he dragged me out of the mud, shouting that we would see the sun again. I promised him we'd make it, and somehow, against every law of nature, we did. Walter's voice softened. He's the reason I carved these names. If he hadn't survived, if there hadn't been one story of hope, then all of it, every bullet, every death, every sacrifice, would have been for nothing. The Delta Force men shifted. Ramirez spoke quietly, with respect. Sir, he made it home. Walter nodded. Yes, and he lives with the memory, carrying what we endured. We both promised each other that no brother would be forgotten. That's why this rifle exists, and that's why I still clean it every night. A small, sad smile crossed his face. War teaches you what courage is, but it also teaches you what hope is. Hope isn't loud. It doesn't make headlines. It's in the hands that drag a brother out of mud. It's in the names, carved into a piece of wood. It's in surviving. To remember, the Delta Force men stayed silent. They realized that Walter had just shared more than history. He had shared the human soul of war. And that, boys, Walter whispered, is why the past matters. Because memory, honor, and hope, they're what keep the world from forgetting who we were and who we fought for. The Delta Force soldiers stood in awe, still absorbing the weight of Walter's words. I've told you the battles, the friends, and the brother who survived, Walter said, his voice calm now, but heavy with decades of memory. But the final mission, the one I still carry, is keeping these stories alive. Sergeant Cole asked, Sir, what do you mean? Walter smiled faintly. Every day I clean this rifle, I remember. Every name carved here reminds me of why I fought, why I survived. The rifle is my witness. And now, it's your witness to... He handed the polished M14 to Ramirez. The older operator held it reverently, feeling the weight not of the metal, but of the lives it represented. Take it, Walter whispered, and remember that history is more than medals and reports. It's sacrifice, it's brotherhood, and it's never too late to honor those who gave everything. The Delta Force men nodded solemnly, understanding that this workshop, this old man, and this rifle carried a story the world might never read in textbooks. Walter leaned back, finally letting a small sigh escape. Some nights, I still hear the guns. Some nights, I still see them. But knowing that someone will carry their memory, that's enough. That's the legacy of men who never came home. The soldiers left quietly, the weight of the story heavy in their hearts. But they carried it with them, a lesson in courage, honor, and remembrance that no operation, no medal, no government report could ever truly capture. Walter returned to his workbench, gently polishing the rifle, the engraved words glowing softly under the dim workshop light. For the brothers who never came home, Khe Sanh, 1968, and in that quiet moment, the old veteran wasn't alone. He was surrounded by every brother he had lost, every promise he had kept, and every story that would survive long after he was gone. If this story moved you, give it a like. Subscribe for more real emotional stories, and share your thoughts. I read every comment. Want to see more stories like this? Check the link in the description for the full video.